You have been programmed to believe that staying alone makes you a failure, a loser who cannot attract women or maintain relationships. But what if everything society taught you about solitude and masculinity is completely backwards? Arthur Schopenhauer, one of history's greatest philosophers, chose to remain single his entire life and discovered truths about human nature that married men never understand because they are too distracted by relationship drama to think clearly. While other men chase women and compromise their authentic selves for temporary validation, there exists a small group of superior men who have learned something revolutionary: that choosing solitude over partnership is actually the path to ultimate freedom and self-realization. Today, I am going to reveal the shocking truth about why the strongest men stay alone and why this choice might be the most intelligent decision you ever make. Schopenhauer understood something that most men never grasp. The very force that drives you to seek a woman is the same force that will destroy your peace. He called it the will to live. This blind biological drive that pushes every living thing toward reproduction and survival. When you feel that burning need for female companionship, you are not experiencing love or genuine connection. You are experiencing your DNA manipulating your consciousness. The will to live does not care about your happiness. It only cares about continuing the species. Most men mistake this biological programming for their own authentic desires and end up trapped in relationships that drain their energy and purpose. The man who stays alone has recognized this fundamental truth about human nature. While other men chase women thinking they will find fulfillment, the solitary man understands that every relationship is essentially a contract where you trade your freedom for temporary pleasure and permanent responsibility. Schopenhauer observed that life swings between the poles of want and boredom. When you want something, you suffer from not having it, and when you get it, you suffer from boredom or new problems it creates. This applies perfectly to relationships. Single men suffer from loneliness, while men in relationships suffer from compromise, obligation, and the loss of personal autonomy. The wise man chooses his suffering consciously rather than being driven by unconscious biological forces. This is why men who stay alone often appear more centered and purposeful than their relationship-bound counterparts. They have learned to separate their authentic self from their biological programming. Instead of being puppets dancing to the tune of evolutionary imperatives, they have taken control of their own existence. Schopenhauer himself never married and devoted his life to philosophical inquiry, understanding that the greatest insights come from those who have stepped outside the biological game. The man who stays alone is not running from life. He is running toward a higher form of existence that transcends the primitive cycle of desire and satisfaction that keeps most men trapped in endless suffering. Schopenhauer told a famous parable about hedgehogs in winter. They need to huddle together for warmth, but their spines hurt each other when they get too close. This perfectly describes the modern man's relationship dilemma. You crave intimacy and connection, but the closer you get to a woman, the more you irritate each other with your natural differences and incompatibilities. Most men never learn to find the right distance. They either suffocate their partner with neediness or remain so distant that the relationship becomes meaningless. The man who stays alone has solved this dilemma by choosing controlled distance over painful proximity. Every relationship forces you into uncomfortable compromises that slowly erode your authentic self. You must constantly adjust your natural behaviors, your speaking patterns, your interests, and even your core values to maintain harmony. This is not love. This is mutual manipulation disguised as companionship. The hedgehog who stays alone may feel cold sometimes, but he never has to worry about someone else's spines piercing his skin. Solitude allows you to maintain your full personality without the constant friction that relationships inevitably create. Smart men understand that loneliness is temporary, while relationship damage can be permanent. When you stay alone, you deal with occasional waves of isolation, but you preserve your mental energy, your financial resources, and your personal growth trajectory. The hedgehog's dilemma teaches us that some problems cannot be solved, only avoided. The man who chooses solitude has recognized that human nature makes true intimacy impossible without significant pain. So he chooses the pain he can control over the pain others inflict upon him. Schopenhauer believed that sexual attraction is nature's most sophisticated deception, designed to trick men into reproducing against their own rational interests. When you see a beautiful woman and feel that magnetic pull, you are not experiencing genuine attraction to her as an individual. You are experiencing the species manipulating your consciousness to ensure genetic continuation. Nature has programmed women to be maximally attractive during their fertile years precisely to override male logic and independent thinking. The man who stays alone has seen through this biological illusion and refuses to be nature's puppet. Modern society tells you that finding a woman will complete you, but Schopenhauer understood that this completion is temporary at best. The moment you achieve the object of your desire, the spell breaks and you see the relationship for what it really is. Two separate individuals trying to merge their incompatible needs and expectations. Women are not evil or malicious. They are simply playing their biological role just as men play theirs. The trap is not personal, it is evolutionary. Every woman unconsciously seeks security, resources and genetic material from men, while every man unconsciously seeks fertility and beauty from women. This creates an endless cycle of mutual exploitation disguised as love. The superior man recognizes that stepping outside this cycle requires tremendous mental strength. Society will shame you for not participating in the mating game. Friends will question your masculinity, and family will pressure you toward traditional relationship goals. But Schopenhauer taught that the highest form of human existence comes from transcending biological programming through philosophical understanding. The man who stays alone has achieved something most never will: freedom from nature's most powerful trap. Schopenhauer declared that a man can be himself only when he is alone. In company, he becomes a slave to others' expectations and judgments. Most men fear solitude because they have never learned to enjoy their own company. They need constant external validation to feel worthy and complete. But the superior man understands that solitude is not loneliness. It is freedom. When you stay alone, you can think your own thoughts, pursue your genuine interests, and develop your character without interference from others. The art of solitude is the art of self-possession. Weak men seek relationships because they cannot tolerate being alone with themselves. They need someone else to distract them from their inner emptiness and insecurity. Strong men choose solitude because they have cultivated inner richness that makes external companionship unnecessary. Schopenhauer spent his mornings writing, his afternoons walking alone, and his evenings reading. This routine produced some of history's greatest philosophical insights. He understood that creativity and deep thinking require uninterrupted mental space that relationships inevitably compromise. The man who masters solitude gains access to levels of self-awareness and personal development impossible in partnership. Society teaches that isolation equals failure, but philosophy teaches the opposite. The ability to be alone without distress indicates psychological maturity and emotional independence. When you no longer need another person to feel complete, you become truly free to choose relationships based on genuine compatibility rather than desperate need. The art of solitude transforms you from someone who needs company into someone who chooses company. This shift changes everything about how you approach life and relationships. Schopenhauer identified desire as the fundamental source of human misery. And nowhere is this more evident than in men's obsession with finding the perfect woman. Every time you want something you cannot have, you create suffering in your mind. When you desperately want a relationship, you suffer from loneliness. When you want a specific woman who rejects you, you suffer from rejection. When you want your current partner to change, you suffer from frustration. The cycle never ends because desire itself is the problem, not the absence of its object. The man who stays alone has broken this cycle by eliminating the primary source of male desire. Most men live in a constant state of wanting, always believing that the next woman will finally satisfy their deepest needs. But Schopenhauer understood that satisfaction is temporary, while desire is permanent. You might feel happy for a few weeks or months after getting into a relationship, but soon new desires emerge. You want her to be more attractive, more supportive, more understanding, or simply different than she is. This creates endless internal conflict because you are asking reality to conform to your fantasies. The wise man recognizes that the problem is not finding the right woman. The problem is wanting any woman at all. Buddhism and Schopenhauer, both, teach that liberation comes through the elimination of desire, not through its fulfillment. The man who stays alone practices a form of voluntary renunciation that leads to genuine peace. Instead of being driven by biological urges and social expectations, he chooses his own path based on reason and self-understanding. This is true freedom, the ability to want nothing from anyone. Schopenhauer exposed romantic love as nature's greatest fraud, a temporary madness that tricks individuals into serving the species' reproductive agenda. When you fall in love, you believe you have found your soulmate. But what you have actually found is someone whose genetic material would combine well with yours to produce healthy offspring. The intense emotions, the obsessive thoughts, the feeling that this person is uniquely special, all of this is evolutionary programming designed to ensure you reproduce. Love is not a meeting of souls, it is a collision of biological imperatives, disguised as destiny. The chemicals flooding your brain during infatuation, dopamine, oxytocin, phenylethylamine, create a drug-like state that impairs your judgment and makes you ignore obvious incompatibilities. You project perfection onto an ordinary person and mistake your projection for reality. Schopenhauer called this the species playing a trick on the individual, making you believe your personal happiness matters when only genetic continuation matters to nature. The man who stays alone has recognized that what society calls love is actually a sophisticated form of self-deception that leads to years of disappointment when the chemical high inevitably fades. Real love, if it exists at all, would be based on genuine understanding and compatibility rather than biological attraction and emotional intoxication. But such connections are extremely rare because most people are driven by unconscious forces they do not understand. The superior man refuses to participate in this collective delusion. He sees through the romantic mythology that keeps men trapped in cycles of pursuit, conquest, and disappointment. By staying alone, he maintains his clarity and avoids the suffering that comes from mistaking temporary infatuation for eternal connection. Schopenhauer believed that genius requires solitude and that the greatest minds throughout history have been essentially alone. When you enter a relationship, you must constantly consider another person's opinions, feelings, and perspectives. This dilutes your ability to think independently and pursue original ideas. Your mental energy gets divided between maintaining harmony with your partner and developing your own intellectual capacity. The man who stays alone preserves his full cognitive resources for creative work, philosophical inquiry, and personal growth. Intellectual independence is impossible when you are emotionally dependent on someone else's approval and validation. Most men in relationships gradually adopt their partner's worldview to avoid conflict. They compromise their authentic beliefs and suppress controversial thoughts that might cause relationship problems. This intellectual castration happens so gradually that most men do not even notice it occurring. They wake up years later realizing they have lost touch with their original ideas and passions. Schopenhauer maintained that the crowd is always wrong, and that truth can only be discovered by those brave enough to think alone. The man who stays alone can explore any idea, read any book, and develop any philosophy without worrying about how it will affect his romantic partnership. History's greatest philosophers, artists, and inventors were typically unmarried or unhappily married men who found their greatest companionship in ideas rather than people. Schopenhauer himself remained single and produced philosophical works that influenced generations of thinkers. The superior man understands that intellectual growth requires mental freedom, and mental freedom is incompatible with the emotional compromises that relationships demand. When you choose solitude, you choose the possibility of genuine wisdom over the comfort of shared ignorance. Schopenhauer understood that attention is your most valuable resource, and relationships are attention vampires that drain this resource without providing equivalent value in return. Every day, you have limited mental energy for focused work, creative thinking, and personal development. When you are in a relationship, a massive portion of this energy goes toward managing emotions, resolving conflicts, and maintaining connection with another person. The man who stays alone can invest 100% of his attention into activities that actually improve his life, building skills, generating income, and pursuing meaningful goals. Modern women demand constant communication through texting, social media, and phone calls. This fragments your attention throughout the day and destroys your ability to engage in deep work. You cannot write, study, or create effectively when you are constantly interrupted by relationship maintenance activities. Schopenhauer observed that great achievements require sustained periods of uninterrupted focus, something that becomes nearly impossible when you are emotionally entangled with another person. The opportunity cost of relationships is enormous. While you are spending hours discussing feelings and relationship dynamics, you could be building something valuable that lasts beyond temporary romantic connections. The economics are simple. Relationships consume more resources than they produce. You spend money on dates, gifts, and shared expenses while receiving temporary emotional satisfaction that does not translate into long-term success or fulfillment. The man who stays alone can invest his time and money into assets that appreciate rather than experiences that depreciate. When you calculate the true cost of relationships, including time, energy, money, and lost opportunities, staying alone becomes the obviously superior financial and personal strategy for any man serious about maximizing his potential. Schopenhauer discovered that true beauty and meaning come through aesthetic contemplation, the ability to lose yourself completely in art, nature, or philosophical ideas without any personal desire or agenda. This pure form of experience is only possible when you are free from the constant distractions and emotional demands that relationships create. When you stay alone, you can spend hours studying a painting, listening to music, or watching a sunset without someone interrupting your contemplation or demanding your attention. The man who has mastered solitude gains access to transcendent experiences that partnered men rarely encounter. Relationships keep you trapped in the world of personal will and desire, always focused on what you want from another person or what they want from you. But aesthetic contemplation requires you to forget yourself completely and become absorbed in something greater than your individual concerns. Schopenhauer found his deepest satisfaction not in human relationships, but in moments of pure aesthetic appreciation, where the boundary between observer and observed disappeared entirely. These experiences provide a peace and fulfillment that no romantic relationship can match, because they connect you to universal rather than personal truths. The superior man cultivates his capacity for aesthetic contemplation as an alternative to seeking validation through relationships. Instead of needing another person to make him feel complete, he finds completion through direct contact with beauty and truth. This path requires discipline and solitude, but it leads to a form of satisfaction that does not depend on another person's moods, availability, or continued interest. When you can find meaning through aesthetic contemplation, you become truly independent of external circumstances, including the presence or absence of romantic partners. Schopenhauer taught that the highest form of human existence involves transcending the ordinary drives that control most people, and choosing solitude is the ultimate expression of this transcendence. While weak men are driven by biological programming, social expectations, and the need for external validation, the superior man creates his own path based on reason and philosophical understanding. He recognizes that staying alone is not a failure or a compromise. It is a conscious choice made by someone who has seen through the illusions that trap ordinary men. The superior man values his freedom more than temporary companionship, and his growth more than social approval. Society will always pressure men toward conventional relationship goals because it needs productive men to support the system through marriage, children, and consumer spending. But the superior man understands that these social pressures serve the collective good rather than individual flourishing. He refuses to sacrifice his potential on the altar of social expectations. Schopenhauer himself chose philosophy over marriage and produced insights that have influenced human thought for centuries. The superior man follows this example by prioritizing his intellectual and spiritual development over romantic entanglements that would diminish his capacity for greatness. The path of voluntary solitude requires tremendous strength because it goes against every biological and social force pushing you toward partnership. But this resistance builds character and reveals your true nature beneath the layers of conditioning and expectation. The superior man who stays alone becomes fully himself, authentic, purposeful, and free. He discovers that the greatest relationship is the one you have with your own unrealized potential. And this relationship can only flourish in the sacred space of chosen solitude. After exploring Schopenhauer's profound insights about men who choose solitude over romantic entanglement, one question remains: are you strong enough to walk the path of the superior man, or will you continue being a slave to biological programming and social expectations? The philosopher showed us that staying alone is not about avoiding life. It is about choosing a higher form of existence that transcends the primitive cycles of desire and suffering that trap most men. Every day you have a choice. Follow the crowd toward conventional relationship goals that promise happiness but deliver compromise, or follow your own path toward genuine freedom and self-realization. Which man will you become? If this video opened your mind to new possibilities about masculinity and personal freedom, subscribe to this channel for more philosophical insights that challenge everything society taught you about success, relationships, and what it really means to be a man